The Boston College Chief Executives Club is the country's premier business forum, connecting world-class CEOs to their counterparts in Boston's business community. Tonight, Robert Iger, chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company, speaks to the Chief Executives Club. This broadcast is brought to you by the law firm of McCarter and English, the exclusive sponsor of the Chief Executives Club series on NECN.
But I'm going to ask you the first question, because we are in Boston. And I understand that a certain quarterback practiced for the first time with his team today. And I think you owe this group, I'm sure there are a lot of Patriots fans in the room, to tell us how he looked.
Well, you said he practiced the first time today.
Was it Monday? Or is it?
Today will be the first day, and I appreciate your support, even though I know you're a great Packer fan. Which we understand.
Me a Yankee fan, right?
Yeah, no. But
look okay?
I think he looks fine. I actually saw him in the locker room this morning. Does anyone ever think he doesn't look fine? Especially the women. He always looks so great.
Yeah.
He always looks great. But practice is actually right now. So it's my love of Boston College and Bob Iger that...
Thank you.
So you opened the Shanghai Disney Resort, and this commitment, I know, for your company exceeded $6 billion, and I believe the government is a partner with you, or I'm not sure. You know, could you speak a little bit about what you learned about doing business in China and what role that park has in your future?
Well, first of all, the park cost over $5.5 billion to build, and we're partners with the government in that entity. So we didn't put up all the capital for the park itself, but the government also put in probably $4 to $5 billion extra to build infrastructure around it: roads, power, waste removal. So it's, the $10 billion that you mentioned earlier is about right, but a lot of it was Chinese money. It's an interesting question to ask me, because I'm not sure I could answer it in one afternoon. I first set foot on that property surveying on behalf of Disney back in 1999. So it was 17 years from the moment I stood on the property to the moment I actually cut the ribbon. Wow. And in those 17 years, it was one heck of an education. I think there's, you know, to simplify it, patience obviously is required for any entity that wants to do business on a large scale in China. I'm sure Jeff certainly knows that. One of the reasons for that is China is a very, very dynamic marketplace. It is still a developing country, and because of that, it's changing rapidly, and that change is coming in a variety of different ways. And so you have to be unbelievably capable of adapting to that change and understanding that the China that you started considering doing business in or negotiating with, and the China that you finished with, was vastly different. And the difference is, if you see it everywhere, obviously growth in spendable income and the economy is one huge one, but just dealing with a country whose government is trying to contend with that change and manage it effectively into the future is tricky, because every decision the government makes, even on the commerce side, is made because they are thinking about where China is going, where China might go, what is good for China and what isn't good for China. And so first of all, you can't enter the market thinking that the deal that you make is going to be one-sided, meaning all for you. I think it's even probably appropriate to suggest that you can't even go in with an absolute win-win. They need to feel that it is fundamentally right for them. That's probably the most important. In our case, we were bringing a business to China that was service-oriented. They were trying to move their economy from manufacturing economy to more service-oriented. So we obviously served that need. We created 10,000 direct and another 30,000 to 40,000 indirect jobs at opening day. But the land that we have sits on 7 square kilometers and has plenty of room to expand. So we'll create a lot more jobs just in that business. And then the developing land around it, which will develop more rapidly because of our presence, that will create a lot of jobs. So that clearly worked. The government of China also wanted to send a signal to its people that it was open to not only doing business with large Western companies and brands, But we bring to China a type of ideology, admittedly a relatively benign one as it relates to politics in China, but still a Western ideology. And in many ways, that had value to them because I think they wanted to prove that they were not as closed off or as protective as I think a lot of people accuse them of being. So we served their needs. They certainly served ours. It was a lengthy negotiation that got into a variety of very complex concepts like land ownership, which is not legal there, as a for instance, and partnership, but they're the majority partner, but we had to have control. That was obviously complicated, but we ended up with control of all the decision making. The whole issue of what gets built and to what extent it represents American culture versus Disney culture. And we actually ended up building something that I called authentically Disney, distinctly Chinese. And that was because I wanted very much to avoid being a cultural imperialist in China, because we had experienced similar things when we built parks in other places around the world. And I thought with a rising tide of Chinese nationalism, we could fall prey to something we would have a hard time recovering from, that being the accusations about American cultural imperialism. And we avoided that. So, I mean, to make a long story short, very complex, very satisfying, because we ended up not only getting it done, but the park that we've opened is doing extremely well. We've not been particularly public about it yet, because it's only been open since June, but the first 100 days were incredibly successful, and millions of people have already gone, and they're staying for almost 2 hours longer per day, meaning per visit, than we had anticipated. So the guest satisfaction, which we measure in very granular ways, is very, very high. So it's a great moment for the company. It is already a decent business, and it represents incredible potential for our company in the most populous country in the land, in its most populous city, for many, many years to come. Because what is better from a brand perspective than a large theme park that people can go to and immerse themselves in a very high level, meaning quality-wise, of entertainment? So it's been great.
Well,
but it was patience. Anything you do, it takes 17 years. Yeah.
That's not the normal American way. So.
I told, by the way, I refuse to let anybody show me before and after pictures of myself.
You look pretty good.
Yeah, thank you.
You're not Tom Brady, though.
That's true.
You know, technology has changed the world as we know it, and with so much disruption going on, how do you lead a company like Disney that has content and, you know, what's the role of OTT? You know, do you consider the acquisition, it's been reported, of Twitter or Netflix because of this changing environment, and how do you view that whole area?
Well, I wanted the company to embrace technology more aggressively, you mentioned it earlier, as a core strategy of the company when I became CEO, because I thought it was inevitable that technology was going to disrupt our businesses, and that if we tried to fight it off or slow it down or do anything that was aimed at deterring its impact on our business, we were going to lose that battle. And so what I tried to do is position the company as a company that not only embraced technology, but viewed it as an opportunity as opposed to just a threat, even though it's very easy to look at it today, given its disruptive force, particularly on media, as only a threat. It's imperative, though, that we embrace it, not only because of its inevitability and the fact that it's changing us so much, but because it's where the consumer is today. On the media side, you mentioned OTT, which is short for over-the-top television. Over-the-top television is basically getting TV, usually internet provided, without having to go through a cable or a satellite box. That's what over-the-top TV is. And it's not only is it in a way more direct, but it typically uses the user interface deployed in internet or web-based or app-based experiences. And if you look at the world today in terms of the consumer, technology is driving not only what people watch, but when they watch it, where they watch it, how they watch, what they pay for things. And there's been a huge change in authority from the distributor and the creator of content to the user of content. They just have, one, they have much more choice, and with choice, I think, comes a little bit more authority. But these technologies, tools are giving the consumer an ability to pick and choose and even price in a much more consumer-centric manner. So you have to embrace it, because it's not going away. In our case, we use it obviously to make our product better. That culture of Disney emanates from Walt Disney's day, where he believed that a technology, by making the product that you make higher in quality, will improve consumption. So he did things like multi-plane cameras, which gave him the ability to paint backgrounds in animation in the 30s and 40s and 50s in more robust ways, and all the way through to what he brought to the modern theme park, Disneyland, with audio animatronics and robots that talked and looked real, as a for instance, and guest satisfaction or user satisfaction was higher. So that's a must, and we spent a lot of money on that. But I think the biggest thing that we're trying to do now is figure out what technology's role is in distributing the great content that we have. Because it's one thing to be as fortunate as we are to have Disney and ABC and ESPN and Pixar and Marvel and Star Wars or Lucasfilm, fantastic. But in today's world, it's almost not enough to have all that stuff unless you have access to your consumer, who, because of technology, is providing you with incredible data to provide the consumer with a more customized, personalized experience, and to basically monetize the whole thing better. And so what we're thinking about a lot is, what role does technology have in distributing our content from us directly to the consumer? How must we invest in that? And the only large investment that we've made in that space is by taking a 33% interest in a Major League Baseball property called BAMTech, which delivers Major League Baseball over the top to its fans. And we invested in that with a path to control, because we want to get more involved in distributing as well. I obviously won't comment on potential acquisitions, and that should not mean that we're either doing anything or we're not doing anything. But when you mention Netflix and Twitter and Facebook and a variety of other, Amazon, Apple, new entrants into the marketplace, you see companies that were not only technology companies and that were distributing content more, but are starting to invest more and more in making content. Twitter licensing the NFL is an example of that. Amazon making movies and TV shows. Netflix is obviously doing the same. Apple's starting to invest somewhat in that direction. So the whole world is changing. And for a company like ours, I think the most important thing is to adapt to the changes that are going on and make sure that even with the great hand that we have, that hand does not become either less value or less relevant in a world that's so dynamic.
Well, just following up a little bit in this world of OTT and cord cutting, if you look at one of your divisions, ESPN, and what's happening with especially millennials not subscribing to cable, but also the cord cutting. How are you still as bullish on ESPN as you always have been?
I am. I'm very bullish about ESPN, because ESPN has created a tremendous brand for itself and has either created or has licensed under long-term deals the best sports that are out there. By the way, one of the reasons I think you're such you're a fan of mine is that every year we push a button that withdraws about $2 billion of our money and deposits it in an account that you're part recipient of.
It's one of the best deals you've ever made.
I'm not complaining about the deal. I'm not complaining about it at all. But ESPN's built a great business.
We're giving you 17 great games for that $2 billion.
I hope they are. I hope they're all great.
Even though he thinks Jeff used to get a better schedule.
Jeff, yeah, NBC's done all right. NBC's done all right. ESPN's created a great brand for itself, and I think no matter what generation in the United States, there are enough sports fans in this country to draw from that ESPN's positioned just fine. What's changed a bit about ESPN, and I think they've adapted well, is the sports that people watch today are not just watched on a fixed television set in the living room or den or whatever in somebody's house. They're watched in many, many different ways. And not only are they watched in their entirety, but they're watched in snackable form or short form. The amount of consumption of short-form video has just exploded, particularly sports highlights. And a staple of ESPN's business was SportsCenter, that was scores and highlights. Not only do they have to adapt in terms of moving that content onto mobile platforms, which I think they've done really well, but they have to also think about the disaggregation of the program itself, and the fact that the destination that was once SportsCenter, which you turned on, watched for an hour, saw highlights of all those sports, while it is still strong and still quite successful from a bottom line perspective, is not what it used to be, because it's been disaggregated by technology, thanks obviously to mostly mobile technology. So it's different, and I think ESPN long term will be fine. But I think if you look at the next few years, you're going to see more growth in digital platform consumption than in the traditional forms of consumption, which was the multi-channel television package to the household. And as long as ESPN plays that game successfully, which I believe they do, they'll be fine. But there's obviously some skepticism near term about what happens to the expanded basic TV bundle, and to what extent will the next generation of people in the United States be interested in that, which is largely, even though the distributors have gotten good at moving the product to mobile devices, but it's largely an in-home fixed TV experience.
Actually, you know, that you raised this up. Can you speak a little bit about the skinny bundle, what you see happening there, and I mean how it?
The skinny bundle is a lot of people, the majority of American households that get multi-channel TV subscribe to an expanded basic bundle of channels, which is typically more than 100 channels for some in the neighborhood of 100, call it $100 a month. It varies. It can be $75 a month. It can be 150 channels, but consider basically 100 for 100. There's a huge amount of value there because of all the quality on those channels and all the variety that's there. But there are a lot of people that feel that there are a lot of channels that they subscribe to that they don't necessarily want, and they'd like to take advantage of basically fewer channels, spending less on fewer channels. And a lot of distributors have created what's called the skinny bundle, which is a cheaper package, but it typically eliminates sports because sports represents among the more expensive channels in that bundle. And that resulted in a loss of subscribers for not just ESPN, but some of the other sports services that was, in the last couple of years, a little bit steeper than Wall Street would have liked, than we would have liked. But that has plateaued, fortunately, and we don't see that growing much right now. But it is interesting to consider a world where consumers have the ability to pick and choose what the packages are that they subscribe to, and I think you're ultimately going to get to a point where that authority shifts even more. Now, it could be that when it happens, consumers will ultimately opt for more versus less, but we'll see. I tend not to be skeptical about it. I just think it's important to be open-minded and realistic about it.
Given the large number of strategic acquisitions, which we discussed, Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm, which have helped to drive your growth, aside from the tangible assets of movies, character, franchises, what other benefits and value do these acquisitions bring to you?
Well, with Disney, we created a company that has the ability to leverage creative success in many different ways, not just across our businesses, but across the world, because the Disney brand is generally welcome in almost every country in the world, including China, as we talked about earlier. And so we can make a great TV show or a great movie, and it becomes a set of books. We're one of the largest publishers of children's books in the world, a theme park attraction or show or parade, a Broadway musical, a game, you name it. And the result is that our investment in the capital that we put into Disney-branded content or filmed entertainment returns very, very strong. We get very, very strong returns because of our ability to monetize that way. Consumer products is a very large chunk of it because it's a business that makes somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 billion a year for us, and it's global licensing. And most of that licensing comes from characters that were created in movies and TV shows, dating all the way back to Walt's day. When we looked at Pixar, that was clearly a production company and a brand that was also leverageable, like Disney, across the world, across all of our businesses. And the result is, if you go to one of our theme parks today, you'll see Toy Story and The Incredibles and Ratatouille and a number of other of the Pixar brands and characters. And that enabled us to not only justify the $7.3 billion acquisition of Pixar in terms of strengthening our animation business and our movies, but to deliver returns on what was a very, very large investment that were more than acceptable for our shareholders. Marvel fit into the same category: make great movies, turn them into great consumer products and games and books, and now we're starting to build Marvel theme park attractions. We're opening up an Iron Man attraction in Hong Kong in 2017. Wow. As an example, and Guardians of the Galaxy is going to open in Disneyland or Disney California Adventure sometime in 17. And of course, there's Star Wars. Star Wars is one of the most successful franchises in entertainment that was ever created. And it's a replica of Disney in many ways. You make a great movie. George Lucas made 6 films, and he turned them into a gold mine in terms of the global consumer products and licensing. And we, in fact, benefited from that, because as Disney, we licensed the right to Star Wars in our parks and paid George for that. So there were attractions in Florida and in California that were called Star Tours. So when we looked at Star Wars, we thought, well, if we could continue to make great movies, which is not an easy task, but we believed in our ability to do that, then in doing so, that success would pay enormous benefits across our global collection of businesses. And so we brought Star Wars out in December of 15. First Star Wars movie released and produced under us. First one released in 10 years, and it did over $2 billion in global box office. But the success of that film in terms of getting new generations of kids interested in Star Wars, and obviously the consumer products licensing business that it threw off, and then a very successful game with EA that we licensed, and we're building $2 billion plus Star Wars lands in California and Florida right now, which are the largest lands that we've ever built within our theme parks. And so it fits the same profile. It's one of the reasons why I think we saw value in those companies that a number of our competitors didn't necessarily see, or if they saw the value, they didn't have an opportunity to monetize it the way we did. In our case, it wasn't quite plug and play, because that sounds a little too easy, but it was close to that.
Well, I'll ask one last question before we open it up to the audience. And as you're one of the most successful and respected leaders in corporate America today, what leadership insights or lessons do you have for the next generation of business leaders, myself included?
Well, it's interesting, because there are many similarities to what you've done. And when I say these things, I say them to describe what has worked for me and what has worked for Disney. And I think that there are a common set of leadership qualities that many good leaders have. But they don't have to be, and not everyone has the same set of them, and people can be equally successful with slightly different sets. So what has worked for us is, one, put all of your focus and make sure that most of your capital is put in creating quality, which is what you've done with the Patriots, as a for instance. It's very difficult to find examples in this world, as dynamic and as changing and as disrupted as it is, when something that is of great quality does not create value. So, and I know it sounds so obvious, but as a leader, not only do you have to focus an entire organization on doing that, but you have to demand perfection from them in as user-friendly a way as possible, because I think you can get to the point where perfectionism becomes more of a fault than an attribute. But that's first. I think it's really important that you have courage. These jobs in this world, it takes a lot of guts, and in many respects, the CEO of a company, while you've got great teams and a board of directors, et cetera, that provide a lot of input and oversight, a lot of these decisions are singular in nature. They come down to after you have absorbed and processed all of the facts and all of the research and all the work that's been done, it comes down to a very singular decision. Do I believe this is what we ought to do for the company? And that takes courage. And lastly, and I've got a list probably 10 long, but curiosity is a big deal too, and I think particularly in today's world. Without being curious, you don't try new things, you don't innovate, you don't discover new places, you don't go to Shanghai in the 90s, or try new technology platforms, or even have your team create new stories for that matter. And curiosity, I think, is a really, really important thing for a good leader to have today, because I think it creates not only a lot of energy, but a lot of innovation. It forms the basis of innovation. And then I'll add two other things as focus and being decisive. There is a whole set of obvious ones that relate to values, but I think that doesn't need to be said. But I think as a leader, you need to be focused. That means people need to understand what you believe is important, where not only you're spending your time, but where you think they should be spending their time. Where is the value being created from? And then you have to be decisive too. You get a lot of input. It's very, very easy to weigh decisions for long periods of time, particularly if they're large and risky. You don't have the luxury of doing that, nor does your organization, in a world that is so dynamic and so competitive.
The area of security, you deal with tens of millions of customers. And in the world we're living in, how do you look at that whole area to protect Disney?
We take it very seriously. We've invested very heavily in it and continue to. We have, fortunately, really good relations with not only local law enforcement authorities, but nationwide and countrywide, whether that's in France or in Anaheim or in Shanghai. And I think unfortunately, it's the way of the world today. You can't do business in today's world, certainly the way we do it and the way a lot of other companies do, without spending time and spending a lot of money on those issues. It's good advice.
Wonderful.
The Boston College Chief Executives Club is the country's premier business forum, connecting world-class CEOs to their counterparts in Boston's business community. This broadcast is brought to you by the law firm of McCarter & English, the exclusive sponsor of the Chief Executives Club on NECN.